Pela is an exceptional defense reducing character that fits pretty comfortably into mono ice-based teams or into any team, realistically speaking. Now, prior to specific Eidolons, you won't be able to build her out for damage, so instead I'm going to prioritize focusing on supportive capabilities, and then I'll be discussing Eidolons, light cones, and relics later on, especially if you're gearing her out more towards damage. If you're looking at light cones and you have Silverwolf's free light cone, this is going to be her best option. Now I understand if you do have Silverwolf and you are putting this onto her, every other option afterwards is going to be a bit secondary. Now if you're looking at Good Night and Sleep Well, that is an additional damage bonus. It does help her out a bit, and considering that with her Eidolon she is geared more towards dealing damage as a sub DPS, this isn't a bad option. Just consider that I'd say at E0 and E1, it maybe isn't worth building around, especially at lower ascension levels. I'd say that if you're looking at resolution signs as pearls of sweat, you need to have multiple copies of this at super imposition, specifically because it's not really worth building around early at super imposition 1, just because the defense reduction is nice, but Pela already has that in her kit at base level. This means that having a light cone that further reduces defense down whilst being nice, if it's not a guarantee, isn't worth using. Your ideal light cones should be Silverwolves as your top priority. If you don't have that, Good Night and Sleep Well works wonderfully. Welt's signature light cone, it's iffy. Yes, the damage bonus is nice, and considering she has a lot of that built into her kit, it's a decent thing to have. The issue I'm finding here is that if you're going with something like this, and you're ignoring anything else, you will need to build out more regarding energy regeneration rate rather than damage. But both of these work wonderfully. For traces, you have two priorities. If you want to just get everything up immediately, that's fine, but I would recommend prioritizing first and foremost her talent, because this allows her to get additional energy after she hits a debuffed enemy, and considering her debuff lasts 2 turns, this is actually really good. In fact, my primary recommendation is get this up to level 7 at a minimum, as you can see here. Anything after is just a nice bonus to energy regeneration, but you want to prioritize that, then prioritize her ult. Her ultimate will be up essentially 100% of the time once you have this, in addition to something like the before the tutorial mission starts, or if you want to slide in like I have here, energy regeneration rate, passive, or rope. Both of these are quite nice. I go for full in energy regeneration rate. Anything beyond that isn't necessary, because in addition to the 8 you have here, the 8 you're getting here, and the increased regeneration rate you're getting from this, it's not really worthwhile to say hypothetically swap this out for something like Sprightly Von Rack, because even though the energy regen you're getting from that set is a slight increase, it's not worth trading out the crit damage and effect resistance, considering that as an ability character, you really don't want these characters to be frozen or debuffed or slowed. I'd say for sets, go for anything. The speed set here honestly isn't that worthwhile. Even though the speed set looks nice, it only applies to units like Tingyun or Asta, specifically because they are applying to your allies. You need to use your ult on your allies, and Pela's attack is a debuff onto your enemy, not yourself. So you can use the 2-piece for speed bonuses if you're really wanting that, and additional action to mean further energy regen rate, but instead I would prioritize something like the defense set. Guard of Weathering Snow is a pretty good set in my opinion. The 8% damage reduction is nice just because Pela's a squishy character. Anything additional on top of that, what you see here is the energy regen and the HP bonus, it's just a decent bonus. You can slide in this in addition to a 2-piece of the defense set if you really want to, or go for 2-piece defense with 2-piece max HP for the Longevous Disciple if you want to keep her alive. At the end of the day, Pela as a unit doesn't necessarily need to be built out for damage, especially if you want to prioritize on just keeping her alive and increasing her supportive capabilities. For main stats, you can go for pretty much anything. Effect hit rate works, but if you're using Silverwolf's light cone, you get the vast majority of this from your light cone, so you don't need to do what I'm doing here. I just have this because I was already leveled. Speed boots are an obvious choice. Ice damage bonus, you can go for attack, you can go for defense. Pela's damage is not significant enough in a lot of rotations, in a lot of teams, especially early Eidolons, to be worth building around, so you can go for defense and HP if you really want to just survive. Same thing with Tingyun. And energy regen rope is always recommended in my opinion, no matter what. So that is her base stats. What about Eidolons? Well, if you're looking at specific Eidolon usage, E1 is a nice bonus, but I honestly say that for the vast majority of you, especially if you have enough energy regen or her talent leveled up specifically, this 5 energy is decent, but not necessary. E1 is a good breakpoint though if you really want to just increase the likelihood and chances of her having her ult up consistently, especially once you're entering into Simulated Universe and MOC with new waves. Now the speed bonus here, it's 10%. Understand that unlike characters like Yukong or characters like Bronya, it doesn't mess up your rotation, it just means additional actions. So I'd say that especially facing off against the enemies from the Xianzhao, in that they have the revival buff mechanic, removing their buffs is actually quite useful. The speed bonus just means additional actions per turn, which is more energy. E3 and E5, I just say they're good, okay. E3, I'm not really concerned about. The basic attack is just slightly more damage, but E5, the talent level up, is actually pretty good. I'd say if you're looking at that, E1 and E5 are wonderful just for supporting her team. E4 and E6 are middling. E4's entire passive and entire value relies on if you use ice-based teams. That means Yuanqing, that means Jinlu, that means any ice-based character who's dealing damage, that is going to be great. E4 is wonderful if you use her skill. If you don't, E4 is useless. E6 is just additional damage bonus, and once again, her damage isn't all that much to where it's worth building around, especially at the cost of her survivability, even though she has passives like this one which increase her damage. I just don't think it's worth prioritizing, especially early on. You can do that once the rest of your account is built out, but outside of that, I'd say focus on keeping her alive, and then once you have her alive, once you have your team built out, you can focus on dealing more damage. For me, my Pela build is Silver Wolf's Light Cone, since it's free, since it gives energy. Her traces are pretty much unleveled, save for her burst and save for her talent. Relics, it's 2 speed, 2 guards set just for the reduced damage and nice bonus of speed. As you see, she has a decent chunk of speed here, not necessarily more than anybody else. And in Eidolons, she's E6. So I could start bidding off for damage, but I want to prioritize the rest of my roster first, especially with other 5-star units coming. For teams, Mono Ice is going to be your best friend. Pela is great in Mono Ice team just because she can consistently freeze, at least relatively well. The energy regeneration is nice. The ice resistance is nice to have, especially for characters like Japard and Yuanqing, especially when you're facing off against opponents that have large AoE nukes. Her biggest downside, she's squishy, but every character is. While she fits into pretty much any team, ice teams are her best, but keep in mind just the 34% reduced defense is wonderful for pretty much any team. It doesn't matter if it's Blade's team, it doesn't matter if it's Seely's team, Yuanqing's team, Hook's team, it does not matter. Use her, she's a great character to have. I'd honestly say that she is an incredibly valuable unit to have, but I would say that she does need a lot more babysitting than other characters. I'd say that since she doesn't necessarily have the damage of characters like Yukong, or the energy regeneration of characters like Ting Yun, she is a bit more tricky to play around. Even though Ting Yun is squishy, if you really need to, you can use her ult on a healer like Bailu or Natasha just to get them up, so that way they have enough HP to survive the next attack. Pela, if she's on low HP, she's on low HP and she's probably going to die next turn. Either way though, she's an exceptionally good character. I don't like her design, but hey, you might. I'd say build her, especially once you get Eidolons. E1, once again, is that breakpoint I'd recommend hitting. Anything beyond that is just a nice bonus. E5 and E4 are wonderful as well. If you enjoyed this, found this helpful or informative, please consider leaving a like, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.